Welcome to the Mint Door podcast with Dr. Karen Tyndall and Dr. Laura Schwint.
You feel like a high achiever stuck in a rut. The Mint Door podcast is your escape hatch. But before we dive into today's inspiring guest, let's talk about adding some serious flavor to your week.
Introducing The Mint Julep, our weekly newsletter that's the perfect antidote to burnout. It's more than just words on a screen. It's a virtual happy hour with a supportive community of high achievers, brimming with inspiration, positivity, and a dash of fun.
Think of it as your chance to unwind, recharge, and rediscover the joy in the everyday hustle. Sign up for the Mint Julep with the link in the show notes, and let's clink glasses or coffee mugs to a more inspired and joyful life, 1 week at a time.
And do you need a visual pick-me-up? Well, we've got you covered. Find all our podcasts and bite-sized coaching tips on YouTube at The Mint Door. Subscribe for happiness on the go.
So, introducing Jonathan Bonanno, a trailblazer in recruitment process outsourcing solutions for dental service organizations and emerging groups. With over a decade of healthcare expertise and finalizing a doctoral degree, being a fourth-year resident in candidacy in industrial organizational psychology, Jonathan is dedicated to enhancing workforce performance and driving organizational success.
As the visionary behind Chief Psycho, Jonathan fosters a supportive community of professionals, harmonizing business and people strategies through his innovative lab methodology and his human values framework. With a track record of coaching, recruiting, and developing teams across diverse geographies, Jonathan has facilitated multi-million-dollar practice sales and empowered over 1,000 team members worldwide.
Jonathan's mission is clear: to empower healthcare professionals in cultivating resilient, high-performing, and psychologically safe teams. Get ready to be inspired as Jonathan takes the stage to share insights that will transform the way you approach talent management and team dynamics.
All right. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mint Door podcast. And we are honored and excited to have Jonathan Bonanno here with us today. So welcome, Jonathan. And thank you for wearing mint. You're just the best.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I was so excited to join today.
I know. We are really looking forward to your answers to some of these questions. And we're going to start with the behind the mask questions first. So the first question is, what insecurities have you hid behind your professional mask?
Yeah, so when I think about what I've hidden, I'd probably have to say the confidence level. You showcase yourself as if you're on stage all the time, right? So you're always on your best behavior, always saying the right things, always feeling really good about it, but not so much internally. And that was always a struggle that I've experienced throughout my career, is just the confidence in my own capabilities. And it took a lot of learning opportunities and pivoting opportunities to recognize how resilient of a person that I really am. But confidence has always been a struggle for me. I used to relate it with like sense of worth and values, but I really started looking at it as confidence and trust, meaning, can I trust my ability to do this? Can I have trust being built with the partners that I'm connecting with? Or is that really just being built on a very fragile landscape that I continue to sink into? So confidence has always been a challenge for me. I think a lot of that stems from my age as well. I've been fairly young in a lot of, I would say, more mature conversations. So that can always be fairly daunting and intimidating, excuse me. So that's where it kind of sparks up that imposter syndrome. It makes you feel like you're having a little bit of an identity crisis where, are you in the right room, in the right conversation, sitting at the right table, or are you an oddball out? And feeling as though you are an oddball, you start limiting yourself to different conversations. And I caught myself doing that a few years ago. And the big, amazing Jonathan that I want to be, I found myself being shrunk down further and further and further and further until I realized that that's not necessary anymore. Why am I going to carve out portions or version of myself based off of the surroundings when I can just be my fully authentic self, whether you like how it shows up or not?
What I'm curious, what was the turning point for you? What was the, like, when you were shrinking, what was that moment where you said, I don't want to shrink anymore?
Yeah, so I am very much a thinker. I am very introverted. I like to say that I'm an extroverted introvert. But in many cases, I can be highly extroverted depending on the type of people that I surround myself with. If they bring me peace, it creates further peace for me. So with that, I think a lot. So I stew a lot. I do a lot of intrinsic thinking. I do a lot of self-reflection. Most of the time it's from the angles of like, what could I have done better? And it was one of those moments where I was beating myself up over something and I'm like, this is not the outcome that you're looking for. This isn't at the effect of you. It shouldn't cost you your well-being, your happiness, the emotional, I would say even control that comes with the feeling of confidence. It was really just a hard stop that I made. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to keep thinking this way because the energy goes where the focus goes. And if I continue focusing on the lack of confidence, the lack of agility, or the lack of anything that might be present with me, rather than focusing on all the great things that I could be doing and always looking at it as a lesson learned, to be learned, I should say, that was kind of like my aha moment. And, I've had them a couple times here and there, but it was probably the most significant last summer where I was just like, I can't keep going back down this rabbit hole. And I'm not somebody that asks for a lot of like sympathy and I'm also not somebody that asks for support right away either. But that moment was kind of like the tipping point for me to recognize that you can only go so far alone, and the thoughts that do become feelings, at times you need a sounding board to communicate those two. So working with mentors, working with coaches as well, to break down the barriers, I guess, that we at times create for ourselves.
I love that you took that deep thinking and just turned it around.
Yeah, yeah, because we get so stuck in our head at times.
Mhm.
And, when we're thinkers, and even if we're somebody that like, I will get with the analysis paralysis where I get stuck thinking about too many things at a time, and then I don't know which action to take first. And then that slows me down again. So then I start thinking about that. But it's like, wait a minute, just you got to take the first step.
Mhm.
Again, if you fail forward and learn from it.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think you talk about confidence, and that's where you build confidence. I think is when you learn from that failure, right? You're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it too is some of the conversations that I'd be in, as it relates to like the imposter syndrome, the identity crisis, the lack of confidence in, just your innate being. You hear all the things that like are on social media and you see like the good stuff, right? We put out there what we want to celebrate and what we want to be acknowledged or known for. But there's so much more work and grit and sweat and tears that goes into it behind the scenes that I started showcasing a little bit more of that. I've been a little bit more vulnerable in showing that, there's a human behind Jonathan Bonanno or whatever the brand is that gets created that he's supporting. At the end of the day, it's not the education, the degrees, certifications, or what you do. It's who you are and who you're choosing to be with the people you surround yourself with. And that's what I really wanted to change.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious with that reflection, is there anything that you'd like to tell your younger self or maybe your future self, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I was thinking about that question in preparation for this call and looking kind of like, what are some of the stories that I've experienced? And, you know, if I could tell my younger self anything, it would have been to just enjoy the moment that you were living in. I'm the firstborn inside of my immediate family, and the first grandson in my immediate family as well. First that went to college, first that graduated college, first of many things. And that's a result of me having to grow up pretty quickly and being somebody that went to work right up 16, going to school, going to college, all these things, right? Trying to grow up faster than I should have been, go 15 going on 30 or 13 going on 30 at that time, right? And I had no reason or inkling to do it. It was almost like it's going to get better once I'm 21 and I have more experience that I can go have, or it's going to get better once I'm 25 because then I get some discounts on car insurance, or now it's going to be better once I hit 30 because this is when everything aligns, right? And if I could have told myself anything, it would just been to slow down, enjoy the moment. You don't need to be the expert in everything. Your job is to be the sponge and learn as much as you can, and then paint and direct the path that you want to take and enjoy it and have fun with it, like sit with it. And that's something that I never did inside of my career growing up. I was always looking at what's next, what's next, what's next. And I still do that today. But it's a lot more methodical versus kind of shotgunned, where I'm more reactive to the discussions or to the opportunities. It's a lot more intentional nowadays.
It's so nice to be able to see that progression from where you were to where you are, and to be able to reflect back. And I mean, we know that you're known for helping people reduce the fear that they feel in the workplace and feeling psychologically safe. So as we have you here today, we were wondering if we could have some of your advice, and maybe if you have maybe one actionable step that a person or a team could take to foster that and enhance it in their workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a magical thing because when I started looking at culture, culture is an outcome in many regards. At least that's how I look at it. It's not just a fluffy term or word that kind of gets thrown around, and then now we have a really great culture, but there's no performance metrics in place, or there's no ownership or accountability levels created. And not to say that you can't have a culture without that, you certainly can, but it also warrants a lot more breakdowns and dysfunction. So when I started really getting deeper into my studies, after I graduated with my graduate degree, looking at kind of the next direction, did I want to focus more on people operations that I used to do, or still kind of silo down into project management emphasis? Well, you can't get a project accomplished without empowering and encouraging the people to do it and do the work. So I shifted gears and started focusing more on that aspect. And that's where I came across the concept of psychological safety. And really the safety and trust component is what really stands out for me. So as I started really pouring myself into all the research, the studies, the case studies, the work that's done behind psychological safety, it really is the foundation for how you create that team cohesion and the culture that you really want to actually build. And it's built on those values of trust, of being in a safe space, and built on open dialogue. And knowing that even inside of a conversation, if psychological safety is present and there's a debate, it's not a debate that's going to be breaking down the level of connection, I would say, amongst a team, but it would allow for more constructive discussion to actually forward how the team operates. And when I think about tips and tricks, the best question is to do your self-reflection. Is this an environment that allows me to be creative? Is this an environment that I can be my authentic self? Is this an environment that I can challenge the status quo? Is this an environment that I'm safe to contribute? Meaning, if I have an idea, can I be well and open in sharing it? Do I have the opportunity to have it land on somebody willing to listen? Or is it going to fall on deaf ears to where I'm not really in an opportunity to be innovative and creative? It becomes more of a dictator style of operations than it does really a collaborative effort. So as I started peeling back the layers to how we build that psych safety, it's really aligning the people strategy to the business strategy. Something I always talk about is, the only competitive and sustainable advantage a business has is their people. So how are we treating the people? How are we ensuring that they feel safe? They have an environment to where they can trust their colleagues to have either a confidential conversation, or trust enough that they're going to be able to deliver in the areas that they need support in. So always having the opportunity to go back and look at the level of authenticity, the level of inclusion that takes place, that's the biggest point that I'd probably harp on a little bit longer is the space for inclusivity. Do we even have that as a focal point first before we go into, let's challenge this idea, let's come up with something new, now let's create something else on side of that? do we actually have a safe enough space to feel included in the conversations that we're in? Or is it on a need to know basis? Right. And I also know those things too. Collaborative discussions don't always mean collaborative decision making, but there's a level of transparency that can take place, which I have found psychological safety to help build and offer that.
Yeah, I love that term, psychological safety. And as you're talking about it, it just makes me think of how many other different areas in life that exists. And where my thought process was going is maybe when you've been in, family relationships or whatever, where maybe you don't feel that you can bring up a topic or have a discussion, it's the same thing. So do you have any advice on that personal side? If you're at home, how do you build psychological safety for yourself or in your home?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I laugh because I feel like that's still evolving in my household, mainly due to the fact that I have to remind myself, like, oh, geez, yeah, psychological safety also exists outside of the workplace, right? And then that's just not only for me, but for my partner. So it's I would say in my household, it's a fine line that we walk, mainly because it's like, okay, wait, are you calling on like Jonathan after hours? Or are you calling on Jonathan and everything else that he brings at work, right? So when we start looking at it personally, it's the same stance, really. One position that I will say that we've taken as it comes to communication is always checking in with the other person. So maybe my husband and I are in a disagreement. I can be in a disagreement with him and not have any emotions attached to it, whereas he might have more emotions attached to the disagreement. So I just know that I need to be present with that. And I'm very empathetic. I'm an empath by trade. I feel like I am. So I usually feel those emotions. I feel the way he's feeling before it even happens. Like, you can sense it in someone's tonality and their body language, right? But when it comes to like the actual communication style to ensure psychological safety is present, anytime there was an opportunity for feedback, we would always check in like, hey, are you open for feedback? Or, hey, I have something to share with you. Are you willing to hear it right now? Or are you available? As an entrepreneur, and my husband as one as well, we're in lots of conversations, we're in meetings all day long. So sometimes we're not really present. We might be physically present. We're not mentally there in the discussion at that point. So that was something that we really needed to work on to not only set those agreements up for psych safety to be developed, but also really look at, what does psychological safety mean for us in our home, right? What does it look like at a personal level? And respect, honesty, integrity, trust, those are really big values both in and out of the workplace for us. So we really wanted to tailor what psychological safety would look like in those regards. So for instance, psychological safety and trust, meaning if we talk about something that we're going to do and you're taking this as an action, or this is something that you're going to have accomplished, what have you, that would be something that we would make sure that agreement is really sound, intact in. Otherwise, we would go then have a conversation about it. Hey, I have some feedback about this. Are you available for it? Or, hey, this didn't work out the way we wanted it to. Can we talk about what didn't work and what did work about this? It's funny because as I'm even explaining this, I'm like, geez, it sounds very transactional at home too. And sometimes it is, but for the most part, it's really just knowing when to check in and when to check on. That's a concept that I like to use, is checking in with the person, check on the task, is how we'll also differentiate some of the different layers that we need. Because sometimes, as we get into tiffs or little spouts, I mean, everyone has them, right? It's important to lean into those conversations. And that's what psychological safety has created for us, is you could either get super upset and be upset, and that's totally fine if you are, but that doesn't mean that the issue is solved or resolved. So knowing the chance, or having the chance to lean into where those breakdowns are, that's been really helpful for us, because now it's not a yelling match or a disagreement or a big whatever. It's just a conversation.
Great answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're an encyclopedia.
It makes me think that it makes me think and wonder, if there is not psychological safety at home, then when somebody comes into the workplace, are they more resistant because of that kind of background that they have? Are they more resistant? Do you need to check in with them more? Do you need to foster more connection with them to establish that psychological safety in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that it absolutely is true. What we are predisposed to is what we naturally see progress into how we operate. I mean, we at such a young age, between like our 3 and 4 birth years, those are like some of the most quintessential moments for how we start learning and adapting and creating almost our personalities and our persona. I mean, we can see all like the funny little videos of like, oh, this toddler is imitating how their mom behaves and she's wearing her heels and she's going out with her dresses and she loves to throw on her hair stuff, right? There's emulation taking place at that very, very young age, even if we don't recognize it. And that translates into how we groom ourselves as adults and then grow into professionals in the workplace. And it's funny that you mentioned this, because one thing that I was just looking at, and there's a little bit of a stir right now on like the HBR conversations around organizational bullying, with a lot of the transition back into from remote to in-office work or into hybrid work. We're now also being exposed to some of those different characteristics and personality profiles again, right? It's been 4+ years now where we're getting back into some normalcy of work environments. And that's where we're now running into, is we've been cut off from the people connection for so long that now, as we start to immerse ourselves back into it, we've created boundaries for what works for us inside of our workday, right? If I'm working from home, I have my setup, I have my zone, I have my things I like a certain way. I closed all my windows before hopping on the podcast because I don't want to hear the train running around, right? Like those little things start showing up. And then now we're in a communal environment to where, oh, we might have a couple triggers also starting to show up on top of that. So how are we willing to lean into creating that safety, not just for us, but the safety that's necessary for that other person that's involved in the organization too? So it's really interesting. Old habits are hard to break, but it only takes 2 weeks to create a new one.
So yeah, what a good opportunity though to create a new world, like, right? And if we're coming into this, like with all that we know, it's sort of a blessing to create something, exponentially better.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what matters, is always looking at ways to improve things. Everything can be perfect, but I strive for excellence.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thinking of coming back into the workplace and being in the workplace makes me think of maybe some of the workplaces that I've been in as a professional, as a high achiever. And I know that one of the things that is a real bummer is when, as high achievers, and you mentioned it early in the conversation, when we feel that imposter syndrome, when we have that self-doubt. So give us some thoughts on that. Give us your take on how we start doing the inner work to deal with that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I think with that was a part of kind of my turning point, if you will, last year, when I really was stepping into, I would say not my power, but the level of power that is behind the resilience that I have, was noticing that the amount of effort and energy and lack of confidence I was fueling into the imposter syndrome and identity crisis conversation, that's what I allowed to kind of take up this space. And it was a peer of mine who told me that you're allowed to take up space. You don't need your notes. You don't need your laptop. You don't need all of these extra things to make you feel like you're sound and secure. You need to feel sound and secure. And in that moment, I was just like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Why do I have this sense of feeling? And of course, I was diverting it back to, oh, well, I turned 30 this year. I feel like you should have all these things, accomplishments, right? All of the stuff that traditional society tells you that you should have accomplished by then. And you fall into that thinking. And what I needed to do is pull myself out of that. I did like a huge social media purge. I get the notification fatigue, so I turned everything off. And I just started focusing on me. And I was up late. I was having those late hours where my mind is just running and I'm always constantly thinking about the work that needs to get done. I started journaling and I started yoga and I started my guided meditation. That helped me it absolutely helped save the way that I was thinking and the direction that I was taking too. So what are the thoughts that are coming to mind? Let's put them on paper. Is there any action behind it, or is it just something that I need to get out of my head? Okay, got it. Where is this feeling of imposter coming from? Is it from work? Is it from behavior? Is it personality? Is it the group? Is it the environment? What can I do to change and replace that and surround myself with individuals that can fuel me in the way that I need to be fueled? Equally so, how can I reciprocate that same feeling? So it took a lot of that deep dialogue to really figure out where that problem, I'm going to put in air quotes, was starting from, because it's all made up here, but made up here, my problem was that I was bringing it here. And it took me and Sarah Cottingham to get together for lunch one day, and she called me out because I kept saying, I feel like everything is up to here and I keep pushing and pushing and pushing down. And she was like, Jonathan, do you see where your hands are? And I'm like, no, I don't see where my hands are. And she's like, you keep going here. You keep blocking your heart from being open to the new conversations, to the new discussions. You keep pushing, pushing, pushing Jonathan further, further down and worrying about everybody else. And it was in that moment that I was like, you are absolutely right. That is why I needed to start kind of this self-discovery mode of, what does Jonathan stand for? What are my value systems? How does that align with other individuals? And how do I ensure that really stands firmly now in the work that I'm doing to make sure that I can support others that also feel like this? Because I still have the moments here and there, but now I know how to better deflect them and pivot around them and remind myself like, it's just a moment. It's nothing to sweat about. This is not something to think about all day long. And I think that was the biggest thing too, is this is a moment in time. This is not a moment forever.
That right there is golden, because so many times we just keep reiterating that thought, rebirthing it. And we should have just let it pass.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
It's I think what's really evident for us to hear when you're speaking is that the fact that you now trust yourself, that you've gone through that, and
Yeah.
you're trusting what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and the processes that you're going through. Now, if we were to bring it back for a moment to sort of like the professional side of trust is a key essential. It's like a non-negotiable, really, to have that high performing, successful team. How do teams get to that point? What's that
Yeah.
journey look like?
Yeah. I love that you mentioned the high performance component, because I'm a huge advocate for utilizing, behavioral and cognitive assessments. I partner with the Predictive Index, and they're a great organization that releases some really great information. But one thing that they always mention inside of their reports is that high performers aren't born; they are made. And naturally, I see that show up in like our tendencies and our actions. But that in itself, just like how high performers are created and developed, that's how trust is developed too. That performer has to be willing to trust the process and trust the organization in order to deliver inside of what it is that that company's desired outcome is. However, that can also look like that high performer's achievement is just solely based on their ability to perform, and because they know what they can do and they trust in their skill sets. And that's how I defined myself as a high performer before, where I trusted my abilities. I didn't trust anybody else's. And how was I willing to create the environment for safety and culture and inclusivity if I wasn't willing to listen or even evaluate or see? And to me, in many instances, trust isn't always warranted. It's earned in my book. Like, we have to create a foundation for conversation to be had when we go into discussions or collaborations with a more, I would say, authoritative or dictatorial style of working. That naturally shows up like you're talking at me versus with me. So how can I make sure that there's trust present in this conversation when all I'm having to do is just take your word for it? And some cases that's what you have to do, right? You have partners where you are able to build that relationship and foundation. And I think that's what it naturally ties back to. What's the rapport? What's the foundation that you created? If I just jumped on a call today and you've never met me before, and I told you that I'm going to take you guys to the beach, and I'm just saying, trust me, guys, the helicopter is going to be at your place by tomorrow morning. Okay, well, sure, that sounds really magical and awesome, and I'll be there at 7:55 once I get the confirmation, right? Like, there's little things that we start thinking about that I naturally look at. That's what shows up in the workplace, is how do we actually foster that level of trust? It's through conversation, it's through relationships, and if you've built your relationship on that foundation of being just trustworthy, meaning being authentic and open, I don't see many areas for trust to start falling to the wayside until you start intentionally not sharing, right? If you are intentionally putting up the wall, if you're intentionally not saying hello back to somebody that you just walked into the office for, you know, trust starts whittling down. And the biggest thing that ends up showing up too for trust to be completely broken is when a psychological contract is no longer honored. And this could be as easy as, hey, Karen, I'm going to make sure that every Friday we give you $5 to go grab a pizza. And there's one Friday that I don't do that. Now there's a second Friday that I don't do that. Now there's a seventh Friday that I don't do that. 9 times out of 10, after the 10th occurrence of that, you're no longer going to trust the fact that that's coming to you every Friday. So as those little instances start occurring, trust also starts breaking down based off of the number of tolerance and frequency we might tolerate for different breakdowns to show up as. So it's almost like the term perception is reality in many cases. So what are you doing to either intentionally build it or run away from it? And that's how I see trust getting created. And oftentimes it happens, or the breakdowns happen when we start focusing on silos, when we start only focusing on designations, or that's not my job, or that's not my responsibility.
Mhm.
Well, whose is it? If nobody's willing to take it, it's no one's.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like it's not something that just automatically is there, and you use that word intentional. You have to be intentional to create it and intentional to keep it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, what I'm hearing is, to develop that personal trust, that personal confidence is, kind of keeping those promises to yourself. But then
Mhm.
as a team, keeping your promises to each other. And what does
Yeah.
that look like? And, when it doesn't happen, how do we address it? How do we learn from it to get better?
Yeah, exactly. Always conversations.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just have a discussion that we naturally defer to any other channel versus just having either a face to face or getting on the phone. We're like, no, I'm just going to shoot you a text, or
Mm,
no, I'm not responding to you till tomorrow, or I'll shoot you an email because this isn't a priority for me. Communication's about the receiver, not the sender.
yeah. Oh, well, it's so challenging, especially I think in healthcare. I mean, to have those conversations, because most of the day is spent treating patients, and so to have those conversations, you have to be intentional about that. There has to be a time and a space, and there has to be an intent that part of the day needs to be about having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I always loved incorporating. I used to be a former office manager, and I always loved incorporating these different conversations into our monthly meetings because I didn't want it to just be, I don't want to say boring because the business stuff is necessary, but there's only so much you want to go through and only so much fun you can create, production collection numbers, hygiene percentage rates, right? All those fun things, which we want to make sure that our team knows and is privy to, but also let's focus on how we're building and growing as a team, right? What are those individual characteristics that, maybe I need to boost my confidence in outbound calls and getting our hygiene patients on the schedule? What could I do to learn from one of my colleagues and just own that rather than feel as I'm less than?
Mhm. Yeah. So good. This has been just so eye-opening, and we could keep you here all day, but I know that we have we have schedules to adhere to, so maybe we'll have to do a part two. But I know that there's some wonderful resources that you offer. One of them is a practice pulse. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the practice pulse is a lot of fun. I came up with that terminology because I wanted to get a feel for the more or less the heart and center of what the practice is operating from. And that is where I'll go in and do an analysis with the team. I'll meet all of the team members. I'll utilize the tool, the predictive index, to have an understanding of the different profiles, dynamics. And then I bring the team into more of a workshop style to evaluate how the team is actually operating, both as a forwarding team in terms of how they just operate on a day-to-day, and then also from a strategic perspective, when a strategy is needed, who is the best positioned for those types of different strategies to be created and developed. Maybe you have someone in hygiene that's more equipped to look at the overarching equipment utilization or products that they're utilizing to upsell. Or maybe you have your clinical lead that could be a dental assistant, and they're focusing on the supplies and all of that management efforts that are necessary. Bringing those in full house, we're able to then better not isolate, but better develop the succession plan for those specific key roles. So that's where we're able to identify, oh, we might have a new marketing campaign that needs to get developed. Well, we know Jonathan is a whiz on, let's say, chat GPT and imagery and all these other cool things. Well, let's make him the person that can help develop a campaign. Let's give him the opportunity to, flex his superpower, if you will, or flex his creativity. So finding ways to immediately identify that is what ends up taking place in the practice pulse. And then we can develop, what does a relationship need to look like? Because it's not my goal to stay with clients forever. It's my goal to leave clients better than I found them. And that's as a result of the conversations, the discussions that we're in. And I don't want them to be dependent on me, right? I want them to be sustainable.
Mm. That's awesome. I love that name. That's really creative, and it just goes to show how heart-centered you are with the work that you do. So I love that too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And then one other thing that we have to mention is you have an event coming up in the fall called Serving the Servant. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we had our, we meaning myself and Sarah Cottingham, she's a partner of mine. She actually is the person that taught my husband everything he knows about dentistry. And I joke with her now, I'm like, who knew that you'd be celebrating another 30th birthday with another Bonanno? Like, who would have thought that? But she is, honestly, I just have to give her some props. She's just an amazing human being and somebody that leads with her heart, which I was easily able to align myself with. She's been a great mentor of mine too. So I just have great admiration for her. But the conversation around our event for Serving the Servant started from our inaugural event earlier this year that was called From Sacrificing Servant to Powerhouse. This is an event solely and intentionally made for individuals that are constantly giving back to others. Those that have endlessly been people pleasers, they resonate with servant leadership style of operating. They're always giving, giving, giving with no expectation of anything in return. This is an environment that we've created to pour back into those that have consistently poured into others. So we like to call it more of an intensive weekend because it's not so much of a retreat. It's a retreat in terms of, we're coming together, but we're forwarding more about the actions and areas that we continuously create difficulty for ourselves in. So like those areas of imposter syndrome and identity crisis and where your energy goes. That's a huge focal point of our conversation because we believe that energy goes where the focus goes. So if we're constantly putting our efforts and conscious conversations in those areas, we're going to find ourselves consistently having them. So what can we do to break the cycle, break the stigma around being able to ask for help, even though you feel like you don't need it? So really, really honing in on that and then having some really great activities that kind of push the boundaries a little bit. One of them is a cold plunge. And when I first heard about it, I was like, no way in hell you're going to have me in 32-degree water. Like never, right? And when I say it was like a nervous system reset, that was part of the snowball effect of my discovery process last year of really just resetting what is going on throughout my body. What am I holding on to neurologically that I may not be connected with? And that was one area for us to kind of test it, stretch it. But then we even go into other exercises like the ones that I was mentioning earlier, guided meditation, guided breath work, utilizing sound bowls and having those sound bath experiences. Those are very, very meaningful We were able to have Shereen Washington join us earlier this year, and she did a guided labyrinth experience, and that was one of the most beautiful experiences that I walked away from, and I gave her so much kudos for that, and we're excited to incorporate some of that into our next event. And then also nature, right? We want to get outside. We're always confined to sometimes, either our laptops or whatever stations or operatories we're working in, but really soaking in a lot of what Arizona has to offer. So we're going to be doing some hikes, some trails. We're going to, of course, do some cold plunges. That's like the staple part of our event, but everything else is just going to be really intentional around the conversations that we have. I usually speak throughout the day, and then so does Sarah. So we'll be able to go through a lot of different lectures and then activities to apply what we've talked about.
That's so cool. I have a quick light-hearted question. I love knowing how things work. How do you find 32-degree water in Arizona in October?
Probably just as much as I found it in February. Freezing. It's freezing. It's very funny because the very first time I did it, I went and stuck my feet into the water and I went, oh, nope. And I jumped right out of it and I ran to the grass area. And Sarah was like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You now don't have to start the process over again. So it's really a mind over matter. When you first get into the water, of course you feel it. I mean, it's freezing cold. And then the silver lining or the aluminum lining, that's freezing on top of it too. So the last time I actually just dunked entirely. So I just got right in, sunk underneath it, and that actually helped. And then I just rested, and you just focus on your breathing. After like the 2-minute mark, you literally become numb to the feeling of the cold water. You're just now focusing on your breathing and making sure that it's naturally happening. You would get like the type of feeling when you're first getting in. After the first few it just becomes a very like, ooh, okay, I'm good until I'm ready to get out. And my first time, I think I was in the water for almost 10 minutes. The second time I did it for about 6 minutes. And the like feeling of time, you have no attachment to it. So after my first dunk or plunge, when I was in the water for 10 minutes, Kara was like, you can get out now. I feel like you're good. And I was like, well, how long has it been? And she goes, you've literally been sitting in the water for 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, I thought it was, maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes, maybe at most. No collection of time.
Wow. Well, that's a way to develop intense trust in yourself that you can do hard things.
Yeah, that was our saying that whole weekend, is like, we can do hard things. We are strong, resilient individuals. We are leaders in power. We're leaders in serving others. We can do hard things.
That's amazing. Well, this sounds like a just fabulous event. And we have lots of ways to get a hold of you, but if somebody's listening to this right now and they're like, wow, I need more of Jonathan in my life. What are a few key ways to get a hold of you? And we'll make sure all of them are in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is jb@chiefpsycho.com. You can follow my work and my stories and any of the events that I'm at the Chief Psycho on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all the different handles. That's the same handle across the board. But yeah, you can feel free to reach out to me and follow kind of my journey there, or reach out and connect with me individually. I'm always open to having a conversation and getting connected with individuals and, seeing how I can create the space for them to share.
Fantastic. Well, and like I said, we just really touched the surface today. And so we'd love to invite you back in the future for part 2. And listeners, if you have any specific questions or topics that you'd love us to talk about when, and I'm assuming you'll say yes. So that, I guess I should ask first. But yeah, let us know and we'll queue those up for part 2. Jonathan, thank you. Thank you for your willingness to do the inner work so that you can bring your gifts to the world to shine bright, and share a little bit with us today about the important work that you're doing in the world. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. We appreciate the opportunity to.
Yeah. All right, listeners, you know we adore you, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Mint Door Podcast. Bye.
We adore our listeners. Connect with us at themintdoor.net.